All right, so relational database, and we talked about it in our previous class, and in our previous class we understood that relational database are database that stores data in a tabular form, that is in rows and columns, and we listed out some examples of relational databases, such as MySQL and such as PostgreSQL and the rest of them. But then, in order to manipulate these databases, one has to make use of SQL, structured query language, to manipulate or to interact with these relational databases. But then we also said that we don't necessarily need to type out to explicitly write out SQL queries, okay, in order to interact with this database. So we might mention that we're going to make use of a technique called ORM, object relational mapping. Okay, and we said that ORM is basically a technique that enables you to interact with your database using your high-level programming language, which in this case is Python. So what happens or how ORM works is this, right? So it maps your class to a table in a database. Okay. So where if you have where a specific class in your high-level programming language represents a specific table in the relational database, and each attribute of that class represents a column in the relational database. And then we say that we have a lot of libraries out there that enables us to carry out the technique of ORM. And we made mention of Django ORM, and I asked if there anyone that have heard of Django ORM before. I think all of us said that we've heard of Django ORM before, but then we can't actually use Django ORM here in Fast API. Reason for that is that Django ORM is tied to Django Web Framework. So in order to make use of Django ORM, you have to make use of Django Web Framework. So that wouldn't come in here, or that wouldn't work here. So we now went ahead to make use of an independent library, a library that does not consider your framework or your library or whatever tools you are using. So it's an independent library, and that was SQL Alchemy, which we installed, and then we start putting things together. So quickly, I'll just load up our project file and turn on our development server, and then we'll continue from where we left off in our previous class. Okay, so quickly, we navigate to where we have our project folder, which is in this case, as usual, the desktop, and project one. So this is where we have our project so far. Or this is where we've been writing literally everything that we've been from day one. All right, so and what I want to do now is I'll navigate to my command prompt. And now the reason why I've repeated this process over and over again, so I believe that we are all familiar with the process. And the reason why I usually come to my command prompt to open up our project folder is that I can actually open my project folder directly from my file explorer. So but if you can, then you don't have to be coming to the command prompt to actually do this. Okay, so quickly I'll then turn on my environment, which is in that directory. So simply say vnv.script .accident. Then we just cd intent directory in domain. Then we open up this folder in VS Code. Right, and this was where we left off. So in our previous class, we had a couple of files. So we created new files, and then we explained why each of these files was necessary. So in a previous class, we created about 4 files. Okay, so we created the crew.py, the database.py, and we also created a new main file. And the reason for that was that we said that let's start the relational database in a new file. And then we also had the models.py and schemas.py. Where crew.py is where we use for our database configuration or our database settings, which we said that we need 3 things, okay, to be available here. Sorry, sorry, not create the database.py. So we said that we need 3 things that should be available here. One is the database engine. So you have to create a connection to the database. So usually we want to do what we want to make sure that our database URL is in place. And I also say that the database URL is what is database dependent. So it will depend on your database. That URL there is different. So usually your database URL consists of so many parameters. Your host name, your host password, the database engine, and the rest of them. Okay, so it will differ depending on your specific relational database. And then after that, we also need to create a room where we can do what interact with this database. That is where session came in. So we said that for each time we intend to interact, whether we intend to fetch a data or whether we intend to fetch a specific information or filter out a specific kind of information. As far as we are going to interact with that database, that we need to do is create a session with the database. So it's similar to it's similar a similar scenario is if you're going to probably meet a doctor, then you have to do what you have to even after knowing the doctor, you have to always have your own time. So the time you go in there and you meet with a doctor, and then the moment you step out, someone else has another time. All right. So now the problem now or the good thing about that is that the doctor don't tend to conflict your own problem with another person's problem. So at your own time, the doctor focuses on what on just you, and then closes your time once you're out, and then reopen a new time for what for another patient, and so on and so forth. Same thing happens here. So for each time you want to interact, you create what a new session for that process, and then once you're done interacting, you know what you close that session, hoping forward for the next interaction. And then the final thing you need again is what is the declarative base. Now, the declarative base is what is a function or a class rather that that carries all the functionalities that you ever need to what to map a class to what to an actual table in a database. So in order for SQL Alchemy being a library that we are using here to understand that this particular class should represent a table, and that class needs to do what to inherit declarative base. Okay, so so we put all those conversions here in the database of PyFile, and then we import it to where we want to use it. And then the create of Pi was basically a function that houses every interaction that we intend to do. So at this point, we have the create user and the get all user. For the get all user, there's nothing there at the moment, but we'll come to that. Okay, we'll come to that eventually. And then we also created a main.2. The main.2 file there was just so that we have a clean sheet for focusing on relational database. All right. So basically, you have still we would have still put these things there in our main.py, right? In our main.py, nothing will have still happened. But let us have a fresh start with relational database. That's why we created that file there. And then we also created the model.py, which of course this is where we do what? This is where we carry out the ORM technique, where we represent each class, or where each class here, right, represents a specific table in the relational database. So that way you don't have to explicitly write your SQL queries. So what happens is that once you execute this code with the help of the SQL Alchemy library, it do what it will translate or it will map this class to what to an actual SQL table. So behind the scene, what's happening is that it's writing out the SQL queries on behalf of you for you. So you don't necessarily have to write that. Just write your high level uh, programming language, which is what we have here. And then what happens is that behind the scene, your high level programming language is being converted to SQL code. And then because when dealing with database, the database only understand SQL. So there's no magic around it. So you can't come and play around with or try to make use of another language. So the whole purpose of SQL is so that you know what you write your high level language and it will handle the SQL queries for you. All right. And then finally we have our schema. So our schemas are basically for data validation, our pendency classes, where we use to validate what is coming in and what is likely going to go out. Okay, that's what our schema files was meant to represent or meant to be used for. So that was basically what we did, and I'm just continue from where we stopped. Is there any question before we proceed? Any question? Any question? Any question? Joseph, Mr. Joseph, I believe you are still on this call, but I'm about to make you a co-host, just in case.
Yes, I am. I am.
All right. Okay. All right. So the silence means there is no question. Okay. So let's just continue from where we left off. Okay. So we have all these files available. So we have all these files available. Now let's start writing what the endpoints that will do what that will help in extracting these resources, because the whole purpose of Fast API is to what is to interact with database or fetch resources some way and do what and send it back to the client, which in this case fetch resources from our database and send it back to the client, right? And send it back to the client. So we basically want to do what to start establishing those endpoints to establish this or to fetch this resource. An endpoint that will help us do what to create a new user, because in our models of Pi, we have a table called user, right? And this user actually saves what actually stores that user's information, which in this case we have the ID, the first name, and the rest of them. First name and the rest of them. So we're gonna continue from there, right? We are going to continue from there. So quickly, I'll just convert this route to be create user route. Okay, create user route, create user. So it means that when the client intend to do what to create a user, what it is to do what is to make a post request. So I'll change this to post request. So a post request, and I'll change this function to create user, create underscore user. And for now, we leave it as it is. For now, we leave it as it is. But then at the end of it, we want to return the user alongside with the user information. Alongside with the user information. User information. Right, so let's just take this out and see that if that is actually going through. So because we have a post request there, so we need our postman. So I'll put on postman. Our postman is coming up. All right, coming up. All right, so our postman is up and running. All right, so let's go ahead and just make a post request to that's route, and let's see if we have the expected response. So let's make this one disappear. So I'll leave this one for now and save that, and save this as well. I don't want to save this as well. All right, so we create a new tab, and then we are gonna turn on our environment. We're gonna launch our development server. So I'll switch it to command prompt, and then uvcon, and then main2. Remember, the file is now main2, right, and not main. And then the instance of fast API, which in this case app, and then dash reload. Okay, well, that is coming up. Okay, so our server is up and running. Let's go ahead and make a post request to that endpoint. So going back here, and then our endpoint is create dash user. And let's make a post request to this one. Detail method not allowed. Okay, sorry, that should be post and not get. All right, so that went through perfectly well. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do what, and create room for sending in user information, all right, for sending in the response, the request body rather, all right, and then we can validate that and with Pydantic, and then go ahead and do what, and create that table alongside with those records containing those information. All right, so let's see how that goes. Let's see how that goes. And so quickly, we go back to our schema. So schemas here is what this is what we will use for what, for validating for validating our user information. So we have to bring this man in here into our main.py. So we import it up there. So up there, I would say from current directory. So from current directory, we probably want to import the entire schema because we will see need for it. So we just say from current directory import schemas. So we bring in the entire model, the entire schema. So in this case, we are also expecting what user underscore info, right? User info. Now, when we leave, if we leave user info like this, right? First API will automatically consider user info as a query parameter, So as such, we do not want that, all right? We do not want that. So we have to especially let first API know that this man is that this man here is a Pydantic object. As such, we are expecting it to come in as a request body, but since we are having an error somewhere, attempted to import a relative. Well, that should work. Yeah, relative with no known package. Okay, let's see what is happening there. Current directory, that should work. No, no. Let's see what is happening there. That schemas. See. Right, so let's debug that. So I think we have a bug somewhere. Let's see. Template relative. Schema apply. That should work. Let's see. No. Same thing. All right, let's see about this one. Up folder. Let's see. All right, let's bring it up. Beacon. It's coming from where exactly? From up folder. Right, so I think that has been sorted out completely. Okay, so that was due to folder arrangement. Are we still there? So let's go ahead and make this push request one more time. Okay, that is missing. It's okay. All right, so that error should be expected. Right, so are we still there? Confirm that you're still there, please. All right. Okay, so having that sorted out, so let's go ahead and start doing what interacting with these databases. Let's go ahead and start interacting with these databases. Okay, so what basically happened here is that yeah, I created another folder within our main folder, and then within that folder I have an empty file here called init underscore init underscore py, and then I moved every other folder, every other file that we've created, all right, and then put it in that inside that folder. Now this init folder here is meant to be empty, and the reason for that is that that tells Python that whatever files we have within this folder should be treated as a module, right? Should be treated as a module. That's what I did, and then that was sorted out completely. Okay, so going back, let's start interacting. Going back, let's start interacting. So now we remember that I said that in order for us to do what to interact with the database, that we need to do was create a session. And how do we create this session? We need to invoke the session that we already imported down here, right? So this is what creates the section for us. So at this point, this session has not been created, right? We only establish that code, right, that should invoke the session, right? Because in order to invoke the session, or in order to create session, we need to do what? To provide the engine, which in this case the database, which is the required parameter. These other ones are optional, right? Those two, they are optional. So in order to create this session, we need to simply do what? To invoke the session local. The session local there is what is a variable and what that is holding the session itself, right? The session that should interact with the database. So we need to do what? Bring in that session local to what? To our main.py file. So we do what? We simply import it again down here. So having that in mind, we come back here and then we bring that man down here. But before we even want to do that, let us sort out the information that needs to be sent to our route, because at the moment user info there is automatically seen as what is automatically seen as a query parameter, but we want fast API to see it as what? As a schema, right? As a pedantic object. In that way, it lets fast API know that whatsoever is coming in should come in as a request body and not a query parameter. All right. So we simply do that by doing what? By type hinting. So you come here and just put a type hint of schemas dot. Remember, we are referencing what? The user class. The user class here is our schema here, right? That should carry out that validation. So that way now, if we try to send another post request, it actually tells us that what that is expecting a request body and not a query parameter again. So doing that, now we have one that error is coming in from where? From the request body itself. So we go to the body and then we simply just go to raw and we pass in that information. So at the moment we want the ID, and at the moment the ID should be 1, right? So for now I'll just put 1 for now. And then we also want what else is there? We need the first name, last name, and email, but all of them should be what? String. So first name, remember this validation will be carried out by Pydantic itself. First name in this case, I'll just use my name for instance, Savior. And then the last name. So I'll just simply copy this. Simply copy that and then put it down here. And this should be last name. And last name in this case, this one here should be Basi. And email being the last field, there field. Email. Yeah, I will just put sample at gmail.com, right? And we don't need this the comma again at the end. Okay, so with that, if we just set this out, then that should go through successfully. Okay, so that has went through and the validation has been successful. Right now, what we want to do again is go back to our main2.py, and then we've received this information coming in from where? From the request bot itself. All right, so it means that if a user has to visit this route, that user has to make what? A post request, and then within that post request should carry a request body that should do what? That should contain the information that will be specified here, right? That will be specified there, and then once we've gotten that information, we basically just want to do what? To start interacting. So to interact, we can simply, first of all, we can simply want to do what? Get a user by ID, by the either the email, because we don't want to actually create a user that already exists in the database. So that will be part of our, or that will be one of our interaction with the database. So we could do that by we could simply carry out the operation. Remember that the operation should all interaction with the database should come from our CRUD.py. So at the moment we don't have CRUD an interaction to do what to check if to get a specific user by email. So basically we want to do what we want to also create that function that should do that. So at this moment I will simply just rename this to creating of user by email or getting user by email. So this will be get underscore user by email. And remember, we said that once we intend to interact, that we always need the DB itself, or should I say the session, because remember, for each interaction we need to create session. So this will be the DB here will signify our session, right? Will signify our session, because the session is basically the database we intend to do what to interact with. And then we also want what the email itself, the user email itself, the email itself. So I'll put in the email there. And then once we've done that, then we can go ahead and just do a query. So I will come here and then I would say, remember, for each interaction we need DB to interact with. Now, and then once we intend to query the database, because there's difference between adding and then querying. Querying means that you intend to fetch, but adding you are updating, like you're adding something to the database. But once you intend to actually fetch, then you can make use of the command query. Now this command here, like I said, is from these commands here are from SQL Alchemy. It's a separate library on its own. If you intend to know more about these commands, because these commands they are much, right? So we can't actually sit down to cover all of them, but I will try to cover the common used ones, right? The most frequently used ones. Okay, so but if you intend to know more about these commands, then you can actually um, look up the documentation, right? It's out there, and then you could see as many commands that SQL Alchemy have, and then you can actually start trying them out one by one and see how they work, right? And see how they work. But then most of our query or most of our interaction, we always use the function query, because we are always likely going to want to fetch a specific information. So at this point, we want to do db.query, right? We want to query a specific table. So then this query takes in the table that you intend to do what to query. This man here takes in the table that we intend to query. In this case, we intend to query the user model, of course, the user model. So I will simply just pass in models.user, right? Now this user model that we have here in our this table here, right? So this table here is called the user, right? But then we imported the entire file down to our CRUD.py up here, where we have this importation up here, right? Where we have that importation right there, and then we want to do what we basically want to query that specific table. Then once we've done that, then we can start adding other filtering if we see fit. Which in this case, if we query this table, then it will basically bring out all the entire record from that table. But then we can also add additional filtering by also adding filter function. So there's a filter function. So this query simply means fetch all the data in that table. Then after fetching, go ahead and do and filter. So there's also a filter command. And then basically what you want to filter is the model dot user table dot the email column. So you want to check I want to filter a record whose email is the same as the specified email that we have up there that we are going to pass down to this function. And then once we filter that, we basically want to get the first record, right? Because one thing about filtering will always bring out the records in a list, right? In a list format. So even if there's only one record, then it will always come out as a list. So, so what we want to do is we want to basically just carry out the very first record from that list. So that is what this first here does. So after bringing all the record, they want to go ahead and filter a column, the email column that matches what this specific email. So if there are three, there are two, or if there are one, go ahead, go whatever the number is, then do what, just extract the face record from that list, right? That's basically what that means there. That's basically what that man does there. And I could just call this query. I could just call this query, and then at the end of it, I want to basically just return query. So I return this one called query, and that is that, and that is that. So having that now, we can go ahead and do what and check first if if we have that specific user that has that specific email. Then if it exists, then we don't want to do what create it again, right? Because we don't want a situation where we have duplicate in the database, right? So give me a second, guys. I'll be right back. Right, guys. So sorry for that break in transmission. Please confirm you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. So let's just continue from where we stopped. Right. So we have a new interaction with the database. So this particular one basically query the user table and then went ahead and what to filter if the user table column the email and then filter an email that matches a specific email in the email column, right? And then at the end of it all, get the face record of that filter or of that query. And then finally, we do what? We send back that query. So now that we have that, all we have to do is pass what the session for interacting with the database and then the email, and that will do what make that query for us. So going back to our main tool.py, we basically want to do that. We basically want to do that. Okay, so we can now call that interaction from the CRUD.py. So but before that, we have to bring the CRUD.py as well. So from app folder, then I want to go ahead and import CRUD.py here. Well, we can basically just do that since they are both in the same directory. So I'll move this. So, okay. Now we want to do what? We want to try out the CRUD dot get user by email. Now remember that all these things takes the session and the email. So so now what we want to do now is to create that session. So we already have this section established. We just want to create it for this particular request and then close it after that request. So we have a session here, right here, the session maker. So all we have to do is to import it down there, is to import it down here. All right, so going back to our main.py, sorry, our main.py, we'll basically bring the database as well. Basically not the entire file because we don't want the entire file. We just want few things from that file, and which is that from app folder dot database. We want to go ahead and import. We want the session local, but that is what we will use to do what to create section. And we also want the engine. Now I'll tell you why we want this engine. We also want the engine. Now the reason why we want the engine is that this is where you create all those tables. So far we've only we've only made provision for these tables, but we've not actually implemented them, right? We've not actually created them in the database itself. So we've not created it in the database itself. So we want to do that in our main.py. And the reason why we want to do that is that so that for every request that come in, we want to make sure that the tables are up to date, because at some point you may actually go back to your table and probably add new columns, right? And then you may forget to do what to update that changes. So that's why we want those changes to be available in the main.py, because every request is going through that file, right? And then before any request gets to each route, we want to make sure that each table is what is up to date. And if there is a new column, that column should be seen or should be made known to the incoming request, right? So that's basically why we need to bring in that engine. And to create this table or to basically map out this table with ORM in fast in using SQL, Alchemy rather, then we basically want to import all our created models, all the tables that has been created down here, down to our file. So we do that by first of all we bring in the model because we want that models file. So this should be comma and then the models file, and then after that, before even starting to run our instance of our fast API, we basically want to get at the models.base models.base.metadata, because all these tables are basically grouped as metadata in SQL Alchemy, right? So we want to do models.base.metadata dot create all. So this should be create all, and then the engine, the database, right? So we are creating all these tables. So you have to they create all text that database, which in this case is what is the engine, which is the connection that we've made with the database already. So we simply just bind that together. So you say bind equals to engine. So with that, for each time we make a new request, well, what happens is that this actually checks, right? So they create all what we create all the table, right? All the available table. But then this function is also designed to make sure that we don't duplicate tables. So if there is any existing table that has been created already, then that table will not be created the second time, right? That table won't be created the second time. So you don't have to worry about creating multiple tables for each request. The create all is designed to do what, to handle that. So it will not create any table that already exists, or it will not add any changes that has already been made. So you don't have to worry about that. So with that, that has been sorted out about creating all the tables. That has been sorted out about creating all the tables. Then we can finally do what, create the session and do what, and start using the session to do what, to interact with our database. So moving forward, we can do that. We can simply just come here and then we write a function, right? Probably we can use a dependency to do what, to be creating this section, to be creating this session. So we can have a function here called then this function we can basically just say, we can basically just call this function create session function. Okay, and then for now this function takes nothing. So this function will act as a dependency, and for now we will basically just return hello for now. Let's just put hello there. Now the reason why I'm putting hello there is that I'll come back there and then we'll explain something else right there. We have to explain something else just quickly before we do that. Okay, so having done that, we can do what, we can now pass our section as a dependency. So I will call this session. I'll call this session, and then this will hold the value of depends, right? So this will hold a value of depends. So it means that before even proceeding to our function, we need to have that available already. We need to have that available already. So we have to import our depends in the same directory we have our fast API. So after that, then we can do what, we can basically pass in the function name. We can create in the function name right there, and that will get sorted out for us. But now, if we come here and then we say our session is basically, we could call it session. Our session is basically the invocation of what our section local, this section local here. So we invoke this, and then we can basically just pass this session right there. Can basically just pass that session there, and that is what we want to use for, and that is what we want to use for what, for interacting with our database. So at some point, we want to do what, we want to pass this session to what, to the get user by email, right? And we also want to pass the user email, So in this case, if I should get a user.info.email, I should get what, the email that is what that will be sent from the request body, So that should be that. And then with that, we should be good to go. And I can assign all this to a variable called db user, because I want to, if this actually went through and then we actually fetch a user, then we should not do what, we should not create another user again. We should not create another user again. But then there's still a problem with this dependency. There's a problem with this dependency. Now the problem here is this: when we try to create a session, right, which we have done that because once you make a request down to this route, the create session what will invoke that section and do what pass that section to what to your route, and you can use it to do what to interact with the database. But then we also need to do what we also need to create. So we also need to do what close that session after a response has been sent. After a response has been sent, and that is the problem we are now having. That's the problem we are now facing. That's the problem we are now facing because at the moment, remember, the return statement terminates that function. The return statement terminates the function. So now we have to do what find a way of doing what of always going back there to do what to create to close the session, which we can actually close that session down here after doing what after interacting with the user, right? Or probably we can always close the session before all our return statement, which there's no problem, right? Which there's no problem. That will do what that will work. But then, assuming we have about 10,000 routes that we need to do what to close the session, it simply means that you have to go in 10,000 routes and do what and repeat the same code. So that's like you doing what repeating codes, right? And it's not really a good concept in programming. Do not repeat yourself. So if there's a way you can put your code once and then manage it just one time, then that will do what that will work. That will work for you. So now in Python, there's what we call generator functions. How many of us have heard of generator functions? Generator functions. Oh, sorry, not generator function. Yeah, generator functions rather. Sorry, generator functions. How many of us have heard of generator functions?
I know about generator function.
Right, you're aware of generator functions, right? So basically, that's what
Yes.
that's basically what we want to do. So we want a function that doesn't actually execute everything at once, okay? But then we can execute them one after the other because the default behavior of your function is that if we invoke this function, what happens? It executes every code that we have there. So it executes every code within that function. But then with a generator function, right, we can only execute one line of code at a, like we can actually control a portion of code that is executing, and then we can do a tend to execute them one by one to we get to the final point. So that way it's a generator function is quite helpful in a sense that it saves you a lot of memory because once you invoke that function, basically that function is not has not actually executed at that point, okay? Except you do what you call upon it again, and then it will invoke up to a certain point, and then stop again, and then you keep doing that over and over to what to you invoke the entire function. So that way, that way, right? That way with a generator function, what happens is that you save a lot of memory because once you invoke the first time it executes to a certain point. Then once you invoke the second time, the first invocation is lost in memory. Like the function is no longer aware of that invocation, right? It's no longer so it means that it has freed up that particular space for the next execution. And how do we actually create a generator function? We simply use the keyword yield. So once you have this keyword available in your function, the yield keyword. So there's a keyword in Python called yield. Once you have that keyword available in your function, that function is automatically considered as a generator function. And let's just put a simple script here, and let's basically but most of us are not aware of generator function. Let's just put a very simple script of how generator function works. So let's put I'll call this new. So this script here is just to demonstrate generator function, and then we go back to our fast API. So if I have a function here called a function of hello, right? And this function takes nothing. And the way generator function or the way Python knows that this function is a generator function is what is once it comes across the word yield, right? So when it comes across yield, so yield is almost similar to return statement, except that yield does not end that function, right? But return statement does what ends that function completely, but yield does not. Yield does not. So I'll put in a couple of yield because remember with the actual function, and once the function comes across the return, it ends that function there. So that means in your function you can only have one exit point, but with yield you can have as many yield keyword within one function as you want, right? And nothing happens. That it does not terminate that function. right? So I will just put in a couple of instructions here. I'll put in the print, and then I'll put hello one, right? And then after the hello one, I'll do what? I will return one. I'll return one. And then after that, I'll still put in my print again, and I'll call this hello two. And after that, I'll do what? I'll put in yield, and then I want to yield what? I want to yield the second value, and I'll do that for the last one, hello three, and then yield three. Hello three, and then yield three. Hello three, and then yield three. Right. So now the thing here is this, right? And now the thing here is this is that if we invoke this function executes, right? This function actually executes, but then it will stop the execution when it comes across the yield keyword. Once it comes across the yield keyword. But then it does not end, but then that doesn't mean that function has ended. So we can still go back and do what and keep executing that function. So what do I mean? If I have a variable here, I'll assign this to x, and then I'll do what? I'll simply invoke this function here. Hello. And then we basically just print x, right? And then we should see what? We should see a generator object telling us that x is basically a generator object. And if you go, let's go ahead and do what and execute this man. Let's go ahead and execute this man. Sorry, this thing here is just confusing us. So I'll execute this man. And then what do we have? We have what? We have a generator object, right? And not the actual function. So it means that that function has executed, but then nothing has actually happened, right? Nothing happened. So it basically just creates a memory for that function, right? To let person know that there is this function that is somewhere there, but nothing has happened, right? So this function will only execute once we call on the next method, right? So there's a method that works with generator functions. It's called the next method. So the next method will do what we start. That is when that function will start executing. So now this implementation here has done nothing to that function. It only tells Python, right, that we have a generator, right, and an object that should execute to what to a certain point, and then you can keep them what we can keep executing in that one after the other till we get to the final line of instructions. So that's why when we executed this, we saw nothing. We only saw that we have a generator object at a specific location somewhere, but the instruction itself has not executed. But then when we now come here and then we use the next command, there is a command called next. And then we execute this. What? Let's see what's happening there. There's a bug there. Give me a sec. Let's see. What's happening there? Next. All right. So okay. Seen that. So this is not that way, but then this other way. So the next text in the generator object itself, right? So there's a built-in function, right, in Python called next. And then what happens is this next takes in a generator function, right? Which in this case is our X here, because that is where we invoke that generator function. And what happens is that it will do what? It will execute that function, or is that generator function, and do what? And stop at wherever it comes across what the keyword yield, and then do what? Return that value. But then it does not mean that that function has ended there, right? But it only executes a certain portion of that function. So if I run this now, then we should now have what? One. Right? We should now have one there. That is the result of what of that is what that was sent. The hello one there is basically a print statement. But then at this point, the current result that we have from that function what is one. And if we intend to invoke the next portion, what happens that we can simply just repeat the same command. And then trust me, at this point, at this second point, Python is known as release this memory, right? That memory there has been released, and then it has used that memory to execute the new section of that function, and then it keep doing that to get to the last portion of that jump of that function, and then you can see what you can now see the hello and then the one and so on and so forth, and it will keep doing that till we get to the last portion. So that's basically what we want to do, because we want a situation that after sending this session, that we can still come back there and do what and close that session. So we don't want this function to do what to end yet, just yet, to what till we finally come back and do what and close it. Right? Till we finally come back and close it. Right? So what we can do now is this: we can instead of actually returning this section, right? We can actually come back and do what, and you can actually come back and change it to what to yield. So this way, the depends will do what will invoke that function. And what happens is that the depends also have the ability to know when a function is what is a generator object. So by default, what happens is that first API will do what will invoke that will call the next function on that generator object, right? And they will get a specific value. And then it will also call the next function again after a response has been sent. So what do I mean? Once a request is being sent here, the depends on what we'll call the next function. This next function that we just used here, this next function, it will do that automatically. You don't have to specify any code. That happens automatically. So it will call the next function on that function there. And what happens is that it will execute this function to a point where it sees what the yield keyword, and then that value is what is now sent to your route, and you can use it within your route. But then after a response has been sent out, right? That is once your route function has finished executing, then the depends will automatically call the next function again, right? So it does that twice. Right? So before the request and after the request, and that's where we want to do what that's where we want to utilize, so that once he called the second request, right, the second next function, then we want to go ahead and use that opportunity and close the session. Do you understand? Do we understand? Am I just singing?
Understood.
All right. So let's just go back and do what and simply just do that. So I want to wrap this in a try and accept block. All right, a try and finally block, though. I'm not trying to accept, because I'm not hoping for that. This should not give us any error. So we have a try and we have the finally block, and the finally block is a block that executes with or without the error. So it means that if we try to do what to create a session, or if you try to send this section, right, and there's a problem, then basically you want to come back and close it. Okay, so whether there's a problem or there's no problem, we always want to come back and close that session, right? So we try to do what we try to yield this session, which in this case, the depends will do what we call the next function on that particular dependency. And then after a response has been generated and sent back, then it will automatically call the next function again on that same dependency. That way it will continue from the next line. So it won't come back again and send and use session again. It will come back and continue with whatever code you have following that yield section, right? Following that yield section. So our basic output finally here. And the next time around, I want to just basically just do session dot close. So I want to close this, right? And that's basically what we want to do. So this way, we don't have to do what to manually put this closing in our route, right? The dependency we do was we do that for us automatically. All right, so having that in place, and we should be almost good to go. Almost good to go. All right, so that is that about the session creating and what and closing. So, so this man here do what will handle that. So then once it's been invoked, what the value of that session is being sent to our variable here session, and then we basically want to pass that session alongside with whatever user email it is being passed in here down to what to our get user by email function in what in the CRUD library, in the CRUD.py file. And then once we pass that down here, then we can go ahead and do what and query and use that section. Remember, the DB here signify what our section that we are passing here at the front, right? At the main.py. So it use that session to do what to interact here. So basically here like saying session dot what query. Basically every direction will have what db dot query or db dot add and db dot commit and rest of them. So where you see the db, that's basically what session dot the interaction, because without a session we cannot interact. So in this case, a db dot query, and then we want to create the user table, and then we filter by what by the email that we passed here. In this case, this email here, whatever email has been passed down there. Then we want to do what we want to query that. Then if we actually query that, I'll put this off. If we actually query this, right, and there is a value, right, and there is a value for DB user. So you want to check if DB user, right? So it means that we've queried and then we don't have none. It means that email exists. Then we can basically do what raise an exception, a HTTP exception, right? How do we raise an exception? It's similar to try and accept, right? And because we can actually handle exceptions, it means that we can also raise. Right? They try and accept in Python. So because we can try, because we can actually handle it, it means that we can also raise it, right? So we can raise it still using the same raise keyword as our, as we do in our usual Python script, right? So we can do that by first of all, I want to raise a HTTP exception, and I have to do what bring that in here. So we don't, or basically we just for now I could just come here and just return something or a message, right? But basically we don't want to return a message actually, but for this particular demonstration we return a message, a error message precisely. But by default we should return exceptions, but we will do that some other time. So in this case I will say that that a user with the email already exists. Okay, so that's basically the message we want to do. What we want to return if we query this man, and what that user actually exists. But then if we try it and then we do not have it, then we can do what we can start doing what creating. We can start creating that. So if we try that and that did not work, then we can create. So what basically to create, I could just simply just say CRUD dot create user. And remember, the create user takes in what and what. The create user takes in the entire user, the Pydantic user itself, and what and the session. So we go back again, Pydantic user and the session. So we pass our session here, and then we also pass our user info down there, and then one that has been created, and then we are also expecting that this man here should return something for us, because each of these things returns something, which is what we have here. It returns the new user that has been created, right? So we go back and then we expect that user. In this case, I could say new user. So after creating, I'm expecting the new user that was created, and then I can finally just do what, just return new user instead of that. So I return what? I return new user, which I'll just simply just return user. All right, so let's go ahead and let's see. So this should be new user, not user info. All right, so that should get us sorted out with that. So let's go and try that out and let's see if this is actually work up and running as expected. So going back, we are gonna make that request one more time. We're gonna make that request one more time. So we'll simply just make a post request again, and then we see that that has happened, right? That actually went through. And I believe that if we go back to our file, we now have a new file that has been created called database KodeCamp.db. KodeCamp.db. Now the thing is that one thing about SQLite is that once we try to access that database, and if it's not there, then what the create engine will do will automatically create that file for you. So if this file is not there, then it will automatically create that file for you. But then you don't want to do this when you move to development. You want to have your database already created, and then what you pass in your URL here, and this URL here is what is sensitive information. So once we get there, we see how we can put this in a virtual environment, and then once we get to deployment, we come back and then we arrange all these files properly for security sake, right? For security sake. Okay, so having that in mind, that has worked. So we see that that user has been created. We've seen how to do how to interact with our database. We've seen how to fetch and send back us what the necessary information. Is there a question? Is there a question before I wrap it up for today? Question. 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 No question. All right, so silence means no question. So that's basically everything you want to know about a relational database. And like I said, if you intend to have a broader knowledge of SQL Alchemy, the SQL Alchemy is a separate library from Fast API. It has no affiliation, has nothing related to it. It's a standalone library. So similar to other existing third-party libraries, of course, these libraries have their documentation. And trust me, even if you want to dedicate a whole week, we will not still cover the entire documentation. So I will recommend that we do what that we look at that we, in our spare time we head over to SQL Alchemy documentation, and then we just have a glance at it, right? And you have a glance at this, right? So, but then when we start to carry out live coding, which is what we will likely do in our last week of this boot camp, will strictly be live coding, right? By in 2 weeks' time, we should run up teaching, right? We should run up teaching, and then in our last week, we should use for revision and then live coding, and then call it a day for, or call it a wonderful week for teaching, and then I can let you guys go into what the project phase and do what I utilize all this knowledge to build innovative softwares out there, right? To build innovative softwares out there. Question before we write it up. Any question? Right? No question. Okay, so as usual, the video will be available on YouTube just in case you want to come back for reference sake. And also, please, I want to be sure that we all join our perspective WhatsApp group. Is anyone that has not joined? Is there anyone that has no group? Samson, Mr. Samson, and Miss Ada, I believe you guys have groups. You guys belong to one group
Yes,
or the
yes,
other. And I also
yes. I'm
believe
in
that
group two.
right, yeah, you are in group too. I believe that you've also joined the WhatsApp group for your group, right?
Yes, I have.
Oh, okay. All right. Perfect. Right, so that's good to go. All right, that's good to go. Please,
All right.
please let also let our colleagues know that if they are not in that group, that it is wrong, that they should be in that group, and also remind them that that is necessary. That's I think they've finished task 5. So you have 3 more tasks to go, right? 3 more tasks to go, and you're up and
My
running.
tax is
3
yet to
more
be
tasks.
graded. Um,
Okay,
I
that will
submitted
start
the
that
last
immediately
tax,
after.
but we are yet to
All right.
grade it.
All right, that will be started out immediately after this class. I'll sort that out immediately after this class. All right. All right, guys. So in the absence of any other thing, please do have a wonderful good night rest, and I'll see you guys on Thursday. Bye for now.